I read this sentence from Prabhupada's purport to Bhagavad Gita 9.3. He says, it's only by faith that one can advance in Krishna consciousness. So faith is very foundational for all of us. It's something that we have to become conscious of, I feel, which is why I started to try to understand it more thoroughly. And I like to begin this kind of exploration of faith with a simple understanding from the dictionary. Now, the dictionary has two separate meanings for this word. This is the first, complete trust or confidence in someone or something. And there's a second definition, a strong belief in the doctrines of a religion. I think it's important to distinguish these two understandings of faith. It's the same word, but the understandings differ quite severely, I would say. It's like the difference between gold and iron. And it's reflected in our understanding in Krishna consciousness of faith. We can look at the definition of the Acharyas. This is what Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says. Complete conviction that simply by Krishna consciousness, one will be elevated to the highest perfection of life. So that's like the first definition that we heard. Complete trust or confidence in someone or something. This is grounded in a thorough understanding, in logic and reasoning. One's willing to discuss this, and one can appreciate others' genuine paths with this understanding. But there's a second understanding of faith. Prabhupada talks about it in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. And he says there, religion conveys the idea of faith, and faith may change. One may have faith in a particular process, and he may change this faith and adopt another. So this is belief. That was the second definition that we saw in the dictionary. Strong belief in the doctrines of a religion. And it is this understanding where you find people saying, I'm Hindu, I'm Muslim, I'm Jewish, I'm Catholic, and having conflict. And we've seen a lot of that in history, and we're seeing it today, unfortunately, still. So it's an opinion or a notion, and it very often is blind. It simply comes from the way we grew up. Very often we believe what our parents believed, and we don't look into it past superficialities. So my parents were Hindu, so I'm a Hindu. Or in my case, my personal case, my mother was brought up in the Roman Catholic tradition, and my father was brought up in the Jewish tradition. And both of them, independently of each other, before they met, they felt that these traditions were just rituals. They didn't have any real significance. And so they gave them up. They became atheists. And so because they were atheists, they raised my brother and me as atheists. And it was in Vrindavan that I realized that, gosh, I'm an atheist because my parents are. It wasn't something that I decided for myself. It wasn't, it was blind, you could say. It was blind following. So this is something that we want to look at within ourselves and really come to terms with. Let's see what else we have here. Prabhupada says that as long as one's faith is not completely in purified goodness, that faith is subject to contamination by any of the modes of nature. We find different types of faith in this world, and there are different types of religion due to different types of faith. So this explains this second definition, right? Now we have the modes of material nature in this material world, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And according to the modes we're in, we'll have a particular type of faith. And we may be very fanatical about that faith. You know, we may be even violent about it. This is like the modes of passion and ignorance, to express our faith in terms of violence. because it's something that's ritualistic, it's not really the faith in terms of the complete conviction that we find in Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's definition. There's a beautiful statement. I think probably most of you, if not all of you, saw the Hare Krishna film. Let's see, how do we get out of this now? Just want to get rid of this. See if I can stop sharing just for a minute here. Are you still there? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, in the Hare Krishna film, there's a statement by Prabhupada. This was after he established ISKCON, right? He's touring around the world, and he's in San Francisco, and he has an interview there on television, Channel 4 News. Oh, here it is, stop share. Sorry, this is new. He has an interview on Channel 4 News, and the interviewer asks him, don't you find contradictions between the Quran, the Bible, or Bhagavad Gita? And Prabhupada says, no, I don't find any contradictions because the goal is the same. The goal is to try to understand God and try to love him. This is the goal, and this is true for all the religions. So this is the idea of faith, that it transcends these differences and comes to the essence. And the essence is something very beautiful and universal. But when we get into this second definition of belief, then you get this conflict, because there's the modes of nature, and the modes of nature are in conflict, and the people who are in the various moods conflict with each other. There's also something we find in the Nectar of Instruction, that there Rupa Goswami talks about this word niyamagraha and niyamagraha. It's a very important distinction. Niyama means rules and regulations. I think it was last week, Kadamba Kanana Swami was talking about how these rules and regulations, the vows we take at the time of initiation, these are like gifts from our spiritual master. And it's how we express our love to him, by following these. And these rules and regulations, the 4 do nots, we could say, are supposed to bring us to this mode of goodness. And from the mode of goodness, we can transcend the modes entirely. So we need to understand why we're following these things. It's not out of rigidity, it's not out of harsh austerities, nothing like that. It's because we want to understand God, and we want to try to love God. This is the reason for the rules and regulations. So that's following for the proper reason. Niyam agraha, with a short a in the middle, that's neglecting rules and regulations. Just like, for instance, my parents, they felt the rules in their different traditions had no meaning. They were just rituals, so they gave them up. There's also niyam agraha, with a long a in the middle. And that's to follow them blindly, without understanding the purpose of them. And that kind of following will not help us transcend those rules and regulations. Rather, the heart may become hard at that time. To blindly follow, to blindly practice austerities without seeing the goal of the austerities. So that's one thing to point out and to meditate on. Also, there's a whole genre of magazine articles and books, and even some movies, of people that have been raised in a very strict tradition, whether it's Amish or Orthodox Jew or very strict Christian religion. And the young people brought up in that are not given a choice. It's just imposed. That lifestyle and those beliefs are imposed by their parents. And very often the children feel, as they grow, as they mature, they feel suffocated by those rituals and those traditions, which are very often very strict and restrictive. And so they break free And then you find these books and magazines and films about these people who left the tradition that they were raised in. Sometimes they speak their own language, they speak Yiddish, and they don't come out with proper education to deal with the world as people who have grown up in a so-called normal situation would. And even amongst devotees, I've read some articles by a young man who was in the Gurukul until he was 13 or 14. And finally he came out and he felt, although in some ways he had a very good education, he appreciated his musical abilities, and apparently he was good in math, but in other ways he felt very unprepared to function in the world. And he said the first thing he did, or one of the first things, was to binge on television, because he hadn't watched television. So he would sit all day, all his waking hours, and watch one show after another. So this is experiences. I mean, as parents, many of you maybe are not yet parents, but may become parents. And it's a kind of tension that parents have to deal with. It's, you want to give the children the beautiful culture of Krishna consciousness that Prabhupada has given us. But you also want them to choose it for themselves, because if it's imposed on them, at some point in their lives, as they mature, they'll make their own independent decision about the direction of their lives. So you want it to be something very joyous that they will choose later on in life. So that's some considerations there. Also, going on about this idea of faith as being complete conviction in someone, that we should understand that just as Krishnadas Kaviraj says that Krishna consciousness and love for Krishna is already there in the soul. It's not something that has to be imported from some other place. It's already there. It has to be uncovered or evoked. So in a similar way, faith is already there. Complete faith in Krishna is already there inherently within us. It's part of the quality of the soul to have complete faith in Krishna. But when we're covered by the modes of goodness and passion and ignorance and combinations thereof, that inherent quality of the soul to have complete faith in Krishna, to take complete shelter of Krishna, is perverted. So it comes out that we have faith in maybe our family, in terms of family, fallible soldiers, or maybe some politician, maybe some ism, communism, capitalism, socialism. But that faith is actually meant for Krishna. It comes from Krishna. It's within us already. And if we can give it to him, that's where we'll find complete shelter and complete satisfaction. We know that if we study some of Krishna's statements in the scriptures, especially the Bhagavad Gita, he says, "There's no truth superior to me. I am the knower of past and present and future. Everything rests on me as pearls rest on a thread. He is the source of the material world and the spiritual world. Everyone follows his path in all directions. From him come knowledge and remembrance and forgetfulness." So in this way, we can understand that Krishna's quality is that he has complete faith in himself. Lord Krishna has complete faith in himself, and we are meant to have complete faith in him. One may ask at that point, well, if Krishna has complete faith in himself, maybe we should have complete faith in ourselves. And actually, from that point of view, we have to understand that our being, our essence, is part of Krishna. We're an integral part of Krishna. So as part of Krishna, when we have complete faith in him, then we can have some faith in ourselves that will do what pleases him and will avoid what displeases him, because we'll be connected in that way. And to have faith in ourselves without that connection to Krishna, that's very much what's touted today in terms of self-help, but it's artificial. It will crumble because it's not based on anything solid. We're tiny, tiny beings. We're very vulnerable, we're very weak. We're all inside now because of a virus we can't even see. So the idea of having faith in ourselves, if we don't have this connection with God, that is not lasting. That's not really reality. Reality is that once we're connected through God, through this bhakti yoga, through devotional service, through sincere effort to be connected, then we can have some faith in ourselves. And we always have that faith in relation to our spiritual master, in relation to the acharyas who preceded us. And in that way, we can actually have genuine faith in ourselves through that faith in Krishna. So we can talk also about types of faith. I think we can go see what we have in the slides here. Are you seeing the screen at all? No.
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. It's hard to go back and forth. Here we go, share screen. Here. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here's the different types of faith. This is a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Faith directed towards spiritual life is in the mode of goodness. Faith rooted in fruitive work is in the mode of passion. Faith residing in irreligious activities is in the mode of ignorance. But faith in my devotional service is purely transcendental. I want to talk a bit now about this very word in Sanskrit that is translated as faith, and that is shraddha. This word shrad here, it's translated as truth or heart. And da means placing, putting, holding, possessing. So literally, the word shraddha is broken down when you translate it in terms of the way it's broken down. That which holds our heart, that where our heart rests, or that place where we find our truth. It's a very beautiful and really profound translation of that word. And it means the essence that I want to try to convey here is that we have a choice. We have a choice where we put our faith. Are we going to put it in a politician? Are we going to put it in an entertainer, a musician, or an actor, or an actress? This is done. Are we going to put it in our pet? Or are we going to find something that's really worthy of our faith? This is a precious quality of ours that each of us has. And we need to be conscious of what we're doing with this precious quality, because it has such an impact on what we think about, how we spend our time, where we go for shelter, where we think we'll find our happiness. That's really the essence. That's another aspect of the soul. The soul is Satchidananda, right? The soul is blissful, innately blissful, which means that every living entity is looking for happiness. That's our search. Whatever we're doing, you can say the thief, he's stealing. Why? He thinks if he's successful, he'll be happy. He's successful in his theft. Whatever it is, we are looking for happiness. So where we think we can find happiness, that depends on where we put our faith, where we're finding our truth, what is holding our heart, where our heart is resting. All these things will drive our search for happiness. Therefore, we have this beautiful statement from Prabhupada you see here. One has to consider things carefully with intelligence in the association of a bona fide spiritual master. Thus, one can change his position to a higher mode of nature. So, following the rules and regulations, we can come to this mode of goodness, and from there, we can transcend the modes entirely. People very often put their faith consciously or unconsciously, but they put it in money. That's so much of the driving force in the world today. We're told, oh, you should get a good education. Why? Because you can get a good job. What is a good job? Well, a good job is one that makes a lot of money. This is the common, unspoken, underlying theme of a capitalist, especially capitalistic society. So the goal is really money, because then when you have money, you can buy comforts, you can buy luxuries, you can get what you want for your senses. But so we're putting our faith in money and what money can get us: influence, power, luxuries. But will that bring us happiness? That's the question. So we have to question where we're putting our faith and see the final goal. And is this really what's going to be satisfying to me? Is this really what I want? And if you analyze it, for instance, in terms of money, just for an example, you can see people who have ample money and see that, gosh, maybe they're not satisfied. Maybe they're not happy. Maybe there's something amiss with this goal that they've chosen for themselves. And so, in this way, we need to make a conscious choice rather than an unconscious one. We go back here. This is in Vrindavan again in the 70s, the early 70s. I was a photographer. I was trained in photography in college. I majored in photography. And when I went to Vrindavan, I was photographing quite a bit, and I followed these women into a temple. Every morning they would chant. There was about 150 widows, and they would chant the Maha Mantra every morning for the entire morning and play the musical instruments. And they didn't chant as we chant with one leader and the rest responding, but about half of them would chant the entire Maha Mantra, and then the other half would respond and then switch in that way. And I didn't understand really what they were doing, but I was so moved by their faith. I was so touched by their faith. It really seemed that they had access to something that I had no access at all to. That maybe there was something beyond my mind, beyond my senses, that would fulfill the emptiness that I was feeling inside, and I couldn't identify or express, really, that I could feel very strongly. And so these women, these widows, had such a important role in my own journey towards faith in Krishna and God. It was so impactful for me. So I wanted to also talk a bit about the really astonishing results of this complete faith. And it's a platform that I'm not on now, but sometimes it's very wonderful to see the highest platform, to know what the goal is and what it looks like once one gets there. And the potency of faith is truly astonishing. Prabhupada says that through this faith, one can get divine blessings. He says this process is very simple. I think I have a slide. Let's see. This process is very simple. One need only be firmly convinced by the spiritual master that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one decides this, he can make further progress by thinking of Krishna, chanting of Krishna, and glorifying him. There is then no doubt that such a fully surrendered devotee will receive the blessings of Lord Krishna. So this idea of faith its potency, sometimes we overlook it perhaps, but by faith, Krishna will bless us. He actually wants this faith to be evoked within us, and when he sees us trying in this way, he rains down his pleasure in the form of blessings. There's a very nice story by a devotee named Sankirtan Das, who was in New Vrindavan, still is in New Vrindavan for many, many years. And when Prabhupada visited New Vrindavan, Sankirtan Prabhu and some others went to visit Prabhupada in his quarters in New Vrindavan. And when they came in, Prabhupada said to them, "Are you trying to understand the philosophy?" And it wasn't that, "Are you understanding the philosophy?" Just, "Are you making the attempt to understand?" Because in one sense, again, we're very small. What can we understand of Krishna? It's so great. How can we understand that he created this world? He created these bodies we're in that are so complex. This is really beyond our very limited mental capacity. But we can try. And then the blessings of Lord Krishna will be there for that attempt, that sincere attempt. So there's also another amazing result of faith. This is quite a well-known verse. Yasya Devi para bhaktir yata Devi tata guru tasyaiti katita hirta prakashante mahatmana. This is from the Svetasvatara Upanishad. And it means that if we have this implicit faith, not only in Krishna, but also in the spiritual master, then all the knowledge that's contained in the Vedas, which is vast, it'll be revealed to us. The example that we can turn to is Gorkishore Das Babaji, the spiritual master of Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur. It's known that he was not particularly literate, and he couldn't properly read or write, and yet this very erudite scholar, Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, wanted to take Gorkishore Das Babaji as his spiritual master. He insisted, even when Gorkishore Das Babaji showed no inclination to accept him. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was so insistent. And the reason being that because Gorkishore Das Babaji had such implicit faith in Krishna and his spiritual master, that knowledge was there without book learning. It was revealed within his heart. Krishna says that in the Gita, in the key verses of the Gita. For those who are devoted to me, I destroy with a shining lamp of knowledge the ignorance born of darkness. So that is another amazing quality of faith. Also, another one is the wisdom. Besides just knowledge, there's also wisdom and detachment from the material world. There's a beautiful quote from Prabhupada about this as well, we can look at. Can you see these okay, these slides? Are they small?
They can be a little bit bigger.
Okay, let's see what we can do. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this beautiful, Prabhupada was answering questions from Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, and this is was recorded on a tape recorder and later transcribed into this book, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. And he said to Brahmatirtha that if you have faith in me and in Krishna consciousness, in the process of Krishna consciousness, that's the requirement for wisdom. If you have this faith, then understanding will come. And as the understanding comes, then also you'll be fed up with the material world. You will not be attracted to the material world. And when you give up your entanglements in this world, then you'll make very steady progress. So that's a beautiful meditation. Again, based on faith in the spiritual master. It's a seed that we want to water consistently, daily, so that this process really has an effect on us. Also, we can see from Prabhupada's example how much faith he had and how that really shone forth when he first arrived in America. He was sitting on the Jaladuta before he disembarked, and he wrote that beautiful prayer saying that he just wanted Krishna's mercy so that he would be able to communicate Krishna consciousness to the people that he met, and how much ability Krishna had given him, divine ability. And also we can see that from this faith, Prabhupada had this incredible courage just to get on that ship at such an age. As we know the story so well, no money, no supporters, nothing really that would lead to success. And yet success was there because of this implicit faith in the spiritual master, in Krishna. Something that we can take shelter of and inspiration from. So the question can be then for us, how can we reawaken our own faith that's lying dormant within us? And the primary answer to that is a question that's answered in different areas in the Bhagavatam repeatedly, and by the Goswamis also, that to awaken our faith, we must be in the association of those who have faith. Bhakti is given by bhakti, or bhakti. It doesn't come simply from studying books. But we need to be in touch with one who has bhakti, one who has this faith. And then there's a possibility, even if we do this unwillingly, that we can arouse this dormant Krishna consciousness. And this is Krishna's causeless mercy on us. It's our voluntary endeavor, and this is our qualification, our voluntary endeavor. We can beg for it. These are hands asking for Mahaprashadam in the Radharaman temple, the Bhakti Goswami's temple. And that's how we need to be asking for the beautiful gift of Krishna consciousness, beginning with faith, the Shraddha. Foundation of this is faith. Sometimes Prabhupada, when he talked about this, Rupa Goswami mentions 9 different levels of Krishna consciousness. The first being Shraddha, faith, and the 9th being Prema, full love of Krishna, complete love of Krishna. And sometimes when he talked about this Ado Shraddha, he would say this is simply respect. You see these people hearing from a spiritual guide, and you think, what are they hearing? What kind of knowledge are they receiving? And so with this kind of curiosity and respect, we sit and listen. And from that, this faith can start to grow. From simply this respectful view. And this is 1972. Is that big enough now? Should I make it bigger? Is that okay? It's okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
This is Prabhupada in Vrindavan in 1972. He was speaking during Kartik, and he spoke on Nectar of Devotion and Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And this is a very concentrated effort on Prabhupada's part to bring his disciples to Vrindavan at this very auspicious month, very auspicious place. This is the courtyard of the Radha-Damodari temple, to hear from him every morning and every evening, simply to evoke our faith in Krishna and in this process of Krishna consciousness that he was so kindly giving us. So what we do in Krishna consciousness, going to the temple, attending the artis, reading, chanting, we can all understand that this is a process for solidifying and growing our faith in Krishna consciousness, in Krishna and Prabhupada. And this will help us enormously to progress in this way. So this is, as I was saying, this is, if our faith does progress, then we can take this as Krishna's causeless mercy on us. It's from our desire, our intense desire for it. We can also ask the question at this point, why would faith wane? Why does faith wane? Because we can feel that sometimes in ourselves, and sometimes we can see it in people around us, or we may have heard about it from devotees that have been in Krishna consciousness and then drifted off. So this is an important question we can try to look at. And one is that just as faith will grow in the association of those who have faith, similarly, a very important consideration is that faith will wane in the association of those who are faithless. So if we're associating with people who have no interest in spiritual life, whether they're fellow students or fellow employees, whatever it may be, then that can be a problem. Maharaj, Chandravala Maharaj was making a statement earlier today, which was very important in this regard, that we can be friendly with such people, fellow students, fellow employees, whatever it may be, but we're not intimate with them. There's a distinction there. It's not that we are at all disrespectful, not at all. Rather, we can be kind to them and very polite with them. But the intimacy we reserve for Krishna's devotees. It's very important. Otherwise, that could be a reason why our faith wanes, and very often it's a prominent reason. But there are others. We also may have unrealistic expectations. Jamuna Devi, my god sister, she identified this as a feeling of entitlement. That one may think, well, I've been practicing Krishna consciousness now for 10 years. I should have some respect. I should have some position. And if we're disappointed in those ways, we can become frustrated. And our faith can become shaky for that reason. Also, another aspect that Vishwanath Chakravarti talks about is that by engaging in bhakti yoga, sometimes facilities come to those who have been engaging for some time. They may get some money, they may get a nice place to live, they may get vehicles, conveyances, and these things are all the grace of Krishna, the grace of the spiritual master. But if we start thinking that this is due to me, this is because of my efforts that I'm being rewarded, that also will undermine our faith. We should always remember that whatever facilities we get by the practice of bhakti yoga, that's always the grace of Krishna. Also, we might become proud. It's definitely a cause for undermining our faith. We may be desirous of profit, adoration, distinction, and these things are material, which they are. And not getting them will frustrate us, and we may start to look elsewhere. We may feel proud. I know so many shlokas. I've been to so many artis. I've had so many positions, so much power. And that pride, Krishna does not appreciate that pride. And that also can serve to undermine this very valuable treasure of faith that's inherent within us. And we'll start looking elsewhere, for sure. And another major reason is certainly offenses. Offenses to the devotees, offenses to the Dham, offenses to the holy name, offenses to other living entities. These things can put obstacles in our path. Something to be conscious of, for sure. This is Vrindavan again in his early years. Something very beautiful about simplicity. Living in Vrindavan, for that time, I realized for the first time how little we actually need to live and how little we actually need to be happy. Happiness is not related to how much we have. It's really related to what's within us. Of course, we all need certain basics, shelter, food, and companionship, but that can be done very simply. And there's tremendous beauty in this simplicity. We tend to make things complicated, unfortunately. So we can look now at another point, that is doubt. Now, ordinarily we might think that doubt is undesirable, but actually Prabhupada describes, and the Bhagavatam describes, that one who is intelligent will doubt. We don't want to be blindly accepting of anything. But in the beginning, we can be doubtful. Doubts are welcome, sincere doubts. That's why we approach the spiritual master with questions, because we have doubts, sincere doubts. And when we hear from the proper authority, then we can put the doubts aside. It's not that we go on doubting indefinitely. Rather, we can doubt our situation in this material world. Can I be happy in this material world? Is it possible? Maybe it's not possible. So I have to look for my happiness elsewhere, which means I have to place my faith elsewhere, not in the things of this world, because they are temporary, they are fallible. So this is an important exercise to have. So we also want to look at more simplicity of Vrindavan. I want to look briefly also, again, we turn for inspiration to the highest standard, maybe the standard that I'm certainly aspiring for, not yet achieved, but just to see what it is. And that is to see the behavior of a person who has this implicit faith. And certainly one thing is that they execute the orders of their spiritual master despite any personal inconveniences. And we see that so clearly in our dear Srila Prabhupada. Just as I was mentioning, coming to the West, giving up all his conveniences, leaving India for the first time. It was such a sacrifice that he exemplified that quality. We can take great inspiration from that, I think. So, an example of simple life in Vrindavan. We have a conclusion here with some points that we try to make. How faith is unflinching trust in Krishna. It's the definition of faith, spiritual faith, and how this contrasts with this material faith, which is really belief in some tradition, some customs. It's not transcendental faith. You could say it's relative. Whereas unflinching trust in God and Krishna is absolute faith. So that's what we're striving for, to leave this relative faith, which is rooted in goodness and passion and ignorance behind us, and come to this transcendental position. And that faith is present within us, but it's covered. And we can uncover it by associating with those who have it. That association is vital. We should seek that association. And again, our faith will wane by offenses, by pride, things that we mentioned earlier, certainly by this feeling of entitlement. And if we actually become faithful, then we will know happiness, actual genuine happiness. So here's a statement from Bhagavad Gita. My dear Krishna, infallible one, my illusion is now gone. I've regained my memory by your mercy. I am now firm and free from doubt and am prepared to act according to your instructions. So after learning from Krishna, we find the exemplary student Arjuna. His faith is completely uncovered, and he's ready to give up his misconceptions. He's rejected his former illusion. Bubble has popped. He was immersed in grief that was unworthy of him, and now he's going to fight in this battle. So I have here this very beautiful statement from Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Swami, who could speak these different ideas in poetic language, and I was really struck by his statement about faith. I wanted to share that with you. This is Sridhar Swami, Prabhupada's godbrother. Just as the eyes see color and the ear perceives sound, only by faith can we perceive that spiritual world. Only faith can see and feel it. The supreme reality cannot be perceived with any other senses. Faith is the real function of the soul, and that is awakened by the agents of Vaikuntha, saints. By faith, one's association with saints increases, and by this transaction, the culture of reality takes place. Perceiving spiritual reality is the function of the soul. So that is our entrance to the spiritual world, this Shraddha, letting our heart rest at Krishna's lotus feet, placing our trust at Krishna's lotus feet, and seeing that that is where our happiness is. Our sense of satisfaction is there, and our fulfillment as well. So then we return to this statement of Prabhupada from the Bhagavad Gita purport. It's only by faith that one can advance in Krishna consciousness. The faithful person also knows that the position they're in, that's not an accident. It's there because Krishna has arranged it. And they see Krishna's hand behind everything, even whatever difficulties they might be experiencing. That's why we have this beautiful verse from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Brahma prays to Lord Krishna that one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds, and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body. That person is certainly eligible for liberation because it has become his rightful claim. So once we become convinced of Krishna's position and his opulences, we accept him with great faith, and our doubts shrink to nothing. And we engage with joy in serving him with devotion. And as a result of all this, the material world and what it has to offer us becomes uninteresting. This is our prayer and our hope given to us by Srila Prabhupada. And this is Vrindavan in the 70s. This is from the top of the Madan Mohan temple. Looking out. Now this is all built up today, but before it was a forest. So this is really our essence, that within ourselves we really want to know why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing, why there's creation, why there's life. And with our mundane minds and our mundane reasoning, we cannot really determine those things. They're beyond our capacity. But through faith, we can understand them. And therefore, this faith is really a necessity. Krishna says that for the doubting soul, there's happiness neither in this life nor the next. So spiritual life, spiritual faith is the animating principle of Krishna consciousness. And this doubt will blind us to this gift of Krishna consciousness. It will suspend our spiritual life. Well, those are some thoughts on the topic. We also asked, this also was supposed to be concerning prayer. The other day, just a few days ago, I think, Satchidananda Swami was speaking about prayer, and he compared prayer to the branches of a tree. And he said those branches may be strong and healthy, but the reason they're strong and healthy is because of the roots. And the roots are prayer. If you have strong and healthy roots, the roots are faith. And if you have strong and healthy roots, which are faith, then naturally your prayers will be very beautiful and heartfelt. From the roots of faith, the branches of this tree, which is prayer, will become really from the heart and not just from the lips. So again, faith is the essence of what we're trying to achieve in Krishna consciousness, implicit faith in spiritual mastery and Krishna. So yeah, we didn't speak a lot about prayer, but some little bit. I think it's about 7 now. Did we want to have questions, or how did you want to continue?
Thank you so much for taking the time out, not only to share the wisdom, but also sharing your personal stories and realizations. It was such a thought-provoking class with all of the definitions and verses you've given us. We've got a lot to meditate on. Before we move on to the questions, we did just want to share an announcement with you all, which will now be on the screen. So these are the 2 next Pandavsena virtual programs for Friday, 1st of May with His Grace Sutapa Das, and Friday, 8th May with His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami. So please make sure to tune into those. And then I'm just going to hand over to Carolyn now for question and answers.
Everyone, firstly, I wanted to say thank you so much to Visakha for such an amazing talk. Really filled with so many lovely stories and inspirations. We've had loads of questions come in. There's going to be a mix of people being unmuted and a mix of me reading out questions for people who aren't able to read out their questions at the moment. So I'm going to start with Trustees Questions. So Harsh, if you could unmute Drashti.
Hare Krishna. First of all, thank you so much for this amazing talk. My question is on the topic of detachment. So as you mentioned, it's important for us to detach from this material world in order to reach the highest level of Krishna consciousness. So how do we do this, or what are the steps we can take in today's material world whilst doing or performing our daily duties at the same time?
That's a very nice question. Thank you. Very important question. That we certainly want to do our daily duties properly. Actually, devotees should be expert in whatever they do. Material duties, spiritual duties, they should try to do it the very best they can. But understanding that these material duties have a beginning and an end. They're simply to allow us to survive in this material world. They're not our ultimate goal to excel materially. Our ultimate goal is to be with Krishna, to develop our love for Krishna. So in that sense, it's like you could compare it, say, to an actor or an actress on stage, right? So they give themselves fully to their part. You know, one's a king, one's a queen, princess, prince, whatever it may be. They give themselves fully to their part, but they know inside themselves that actually I'm just acting this part. My actual identity is that I'm so-and-so and I live so-and-so and I, you know, whatever their history is. So in a similar way, we do our duties very well, very expertly in the material world, but we know inside ourselves that actually I'm a spirit soul, I'm part and parcel of Krishna. I want to reconnect with Krishna. I want to serve him with love and devotion. And in that way, we can balance these two things, the material and the spiritual, and do both well. We don't want devotees, people to think, oh, devotees don't do well in school, they don't do well professionally, they're not responsible. No, it should be the opposite. The devotees do the best in school. The devotees are so responsible, they're so expert in their service. And meanwhile, those devotees know very well that I'm Krishna's servant. I'm the servant of my spiritual master. And that is my real identity.
Thank you.
Is that, would
Yes.
you go any further?
Thank you so much.
Okay, and just to let everyone know, you can still submit your questions, so just keep messaging them on the chat. So the next question is an anonymous question. This person says, thank you so much for the talk. Their question is, how do we approach and serve a spiritual master?
How to approach and serve the spiritual master, that we come, first of all, with humility, with obeisances, with the sense of desiring to serve the spiritual master, for sure. And with questions. Questions are very important. Questions mean that we've been hearing the philosophy and we're curious about it. Something isn't clear, something we want to go deeper into. These things, the spiritual master will welcome these things if they come from a place of sincerity. And this is also a service, and to sit and simply patiently hear the spiritual master. Like I showed that picture earlier, the devotees sitting and hearing from Prabhupada. So he wasn't, when he spoke, he was not trying to entertain us. Although he spoke with intensity, he spoke with feeling, but it wasn't that he was entertaining us. He expected us to come and patiently hear him because we're human beings. We have human intelligence. This is what we're meant to do. And we should put aside our restlessness and simply try to please Krishna through this act of hearing and meditating on what we've heard, remembering it, and then delving deeper into it through questions, through service, through submission. In this way, these are wonderful services that the spiritual master will appreciate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So the next one is Abhidas. So Harsh, can you unmute Abhidas?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
What do we do if we did some Vaishnava Aparadha and if we couldn't approach the person directly to ask for forgiveness? So, because I heard that it is necessary, if we did some Vaishnava Aparadha, we had to approach the devotee personally and ask for forgiveness. But if it's not possible, is there any other way?
Yeah, there's the story of, you probably know the story of Ambarish Maharaj and
Yes.
Durvasa Muni. Durvasa Muni offended Ambarish Maharaj, and Durvasa Muni went everywhere looking for shelter, and finally he was directed back to Ambarish Maharaj, who immediately gave him shelter without any question or hesitation. So certainly the ideal is to go back to the person. If that's impossible, then through prayer, through sincere prayer, we can tell Krishna that we have remorse, we have repentance about the offense that we've committed, the aparad, and that we really want to rectify ourselves. We can even write this, to make it more solid, write our regret in this regard, and If there's somebody who's acquainted with that person, we can, a relative, a friend of that person that we've offended, we can express it to him or her. So in this way, it should be a sincere appeal, not something superficial, but something very deep within us, so that not only are we begging forgiveness for that apparat, but we're also praying that we don't do the same thing again with somebody else. And we want to learn from our mistake and rectify it. And Krishna is in our hearts. He will hear this sincerity and he'll appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
I really like that question. Okay, so the next one is an anonymous question. At which point did you know you had solid faith in Krishna consciousness?
Well, I mean, faith, I think, is something, if you compare it to a tree, the roots of a tree, you think it grows gradually, Very often, especially new gardeners, they want things to grow very quickly. But trees especially, they grow slowly. The roots, sometimes the roots go down, down, down. You can't see them. And you see the top part, right? And you think nothing's happening. It's just there, nothing happened. But meanwhile, the roots are going down, down, down. The roots being the faith. So I think, hearing repeatedly, daily, and chanting, all these are ways to strengthen these roots. But there was actually, in my life, there was an incident after Vrindavan. It was then my boyfriend, became my husband, Yodabar, and we went to Calcutta temple, ISKCON temple, and we were helping there with the publication of the Vyasa Puja book, right? We were living in the temple, and I was not initiated. It was a very difficult time for me because of many reasons. The temple was a hard place to live. The devotees were not getting along with each other. There was a lot of illness. There are Western devotees in India. They weren't used to the food. They're not used to the water. They're not used to the people. The atmosphere was all very new. And there was a lot of illness and tension in the temple. And after we were there for 2 or 3 months, Prabhupada came and he called for an istagosti in the morning. I mentioned this in the memoir. So we all filed into his room and he waited for all of us to come. Somebody was missing and he sent a devotee to find her. Finally, when we were all there, he spoke. And he spoke the very basics of Krishna consciousness that even as a newcomer, I had heard many times already. But he spoke it with such realization. We're not this body, we're not meant to be in this world. We're meant for a higher purpose. That purpose can be fulfilled through seva, through service to the Lord, through cooperating with our God brothers and God sisters, by trying to give this gift to others. Very basic philosophy. But he did say one thing that I had never heard before. And he spoke about how it was so difficult for him when he came to America for the first time. And he didn't speak about the 2 heart attacks that he had in the Jaladuta and how if he had a third one, he surely would have died. He didn't speak about how his tape recorder was stolen and his typewriter, the only 2 valuables he had. He didn't talk about that. He didn't talk about he was rooming with a young man who went on a bad drug trip who threatened him. Prabhupada said he showed this ferocious feature. He didn't talk about that. What he talked about as an austerity for him coming to America was he had to share a refrigerator with someone who kept meat in that refrigerator. That was his austerity that he mentioned at that istagosti, which for me was so extraordinary compared to what he could have mentioned. But then you think from his point of view, he's such a high caliber Vaishnava. And to the idea of keeping his boga in a refrigerator where there was meat was horrific for him. Horrific. So, yeah, these are some illustrations, I guess, of where we can come to in our own consciousness. to try to come to this amazing standard that Prabhupada has given us of complete faith in Krishna and in the spiritual master, and taking all inconveniences for fulfilling the instructions of our spiritual master. Did I go around the question? Can you repeat the question for me?
So the question was, at which point did you know you have solid faith?
Yeah, right. So in the Sistagosti, Prabhupada mentioned that and all this very basic philosophy. And when I had entered that room, it's his room, it's still there in Calcutta, Prabhupada's room, same temple, same layout of the temple. I had felt such a burden living in the temple with all these arguing people and quite distressed. I felt like I had weighed down a weight of all these problems. And after hearing from him, his experiences and his expression of Krishna consciousness, when I left, it was like I was floating. I was so light and freed from these difficulties and problems that had weighed me down. So it was the first time that I experienced the potency of transcendental vibration. And I would say that gave a great boost to my own faith.
Thank you. So the next question will be asked by Nayan. And so Harsh, can you unmute him, Nayan? Sorry.
Hare Krishna, thank you for your class. So my question, I'm just going to read it out. It was, for someone in the early stages of Krishna consciousness, it may be difficult to see one's own suffering as the Lord's special mercy for inducing his devotee to completely let go of the material world. And rather, he may see his suffering as the result of the Lord's absence. So how can we switch our thinking to maintain our faith and see our suffering as the Lord's mercy?
Yeah, at the beginning stages of Krishna consciousness, it is difficult to see our suffering as something given by Krishna, definitely. And this again, it's a question of a patient hearing that we come to understand. As I was saying earlier, everything rests on Krishna as pearls rest on a thread. In one sense, we have this word accident in English, but in a higher sense, there are no accidents. Nothing happens without Krishna being aware of it. Not a blade of grass moves without Krishna's will, you could say. So certainly suffering is very difficult to understand for someone just coming to Krishna consciousness. It could be a hurdle, you could say, but it's all the more reason to become immersed in this philosophy, to see that this is an opportunity. As difficult as it is, and as unwanted as it is, somehow I can turn this challenge into an opportunity to let me rely on Krishna more, let me go deeper into the philosophy, let me hear from others who are suffering. Again, we can turn to the highest example of Queen Kunti. She lost her husband, her children were in the forest, and then repeatedly attempts were made to murder her and her children. Calamities, just continuous calamities. And yet she says, let them come again, because by these calamities coming, I remember you. So again, this is a very exalted position. I'm certainly not on that position, but I can take inspiration from it, that there is shelter there. And we can approach that shelter. That is Sharanagati. Sharana means shelter, Agati, approaching. So we want to approach that shelter, which is actual shelter. Because frankly speaking, this material world is a place of suffering. Like right now, I could say I don't have pain in my body, but I'm going to get sick, I'm going to die. I will certainly be experiencing pain. And that is the nature of this world. We're going to experience birth, death, old age, disease. These are very painful experiences. So the sooner we can learn to find Krishna in those experiences, the better off we will be. And they are inevitable. They are unavoidable. Some of them, of course, if we act properly, we can avoid some, if we have a good diet, if we have exercise and so forth. But others, disease is there with the body. And death is just awaiting us. We especially see that now with this coronavirus. So many people have passed away, even from our Bhaktivedanta Manor community. So the suffering is there for all of us. And we have to hear from Prabhupada and apply the teachings and try to delve deeply into them. I don't think there's any shortcut for that. Is that okay? Is there something else that you would like to discuss further about that?
No, thank you. That was a nice answer. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question, I'll read out one of the anonymous questions. So you mentioned simplicity a lot while you were talking about lifestyle in Vrindavan. How important is it for our Krishna consciousness, and in what ways?
Simplicity, you're saying? Yeah, I think there's stages in life, as we know. There's brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas. And so certainly for the celibate stage, simplicity is stressed. That the brahmachari, the brahmacharini, they live simply. Very often they live communally. They have very few possessions. They give themselves fully to the service in the temple. Grihastha life, however, is different, because Grihastha life generally means children are involved, and children means that money is needed so they can get them what they require, the house, the facilities, the education, and so forth. So at that point, life can become more complex, certainly in Grihastha life. Not that it should be excessively complex, but it can get more complex. We want to give children all the opportunities that we can so that they can do what they love to do in life. But then for vanaprastha especially, simplicity is there. We can again return to simple foods very often, speaking from personal experience. We can't digest very rich, heavy food, so we are better off eating simply. We can dress simply, we can live simply. Even in the material world, you find people that had families, 2, 3 children. The children grow and have their own jobs, and then the husband and wife, they scale down. They'll have a smaller house. So this is another aspect of simplicity, and it's actually very natural. And to resist that is not good for the mind. The mind becomes disturbed, really. If you have 2 people living in a big house with so many accoutrements, so many things they don't need, it's really unnecessary distraction. So in one sense, it's natural. In another sense, we can use this information and apply it in our lives according to where we are in terms of our development, in terms of our life trajectory.
Thank you. So the next question is, I don't know what this person's name is, but DP Shorts. So we'll unmute you.
Hare Krishna, sorry, it's Daya. Hare Krishna, Mother Visakha, it's really good to hear from you. So I'm not sure if my question is going to make sense. I'm going to try. You mentioned doubt, that we need to use doubt to not follow blindly. So I was just wondering, what happens when there isn't much faith? If we don't have much faith, how do we know? How can we battle with the doubt? How can we not let the doubt overwhelm or drown the faith?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. And I think it's like we want to approach it from as many angles as we can, right? To become immersed in Krishna consciousness and try to benefit fully from Krishna consciousness. So if we have these serious doubts, certainly one thing to do is to express them to somebody who's knowledgeable, who's faithful, who has experience and maturity in Krishna consciousness. Just honestly express them and hear from that person. That will be a great help. This knowledge, this understanding that we try to gain, this will give us fortitude. And we can see how worthy Krishna is of our faith as we hear from people who are knowledgeable, people who are faithful. And then also to spend some time every day reading Prabhupada's books. I think that's a great help to overcome our doubts and to reawaken our faith, you could say. And also very much to follow the rules and regulations. We can't expect faith and love and understanding to arise if we're not coming at least to the mode of goodness, which means the 4 rules and regulations, and also chanting. Chanting is something that will help us transcend the rules and regulations. Because in one sense, I mean, we're trying to use our mind, we're trying to use our intelligence to understand. But again, we're very limited. What can we understand? But if we have some experience of the sweetness of the holy name, of the sweetness of devotional service, that will really enlarge our faith and diminish our doubts. It's an existential thing. Just like in Vrindavan, as I was saying, I didn't speak Hindi. No one preached to me. But I could experience the faith of these people, and that aroused in me a desire to taste that faith myself, to become immersed in that faith as they were immersed. So these kind of things together can help us very much overcome doubts, however big they are, and increase our faith gradually.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mother Visakha.
Thank you. That was a great question.
Okay, great. So another anonymous question. I think this may be our last question actually, because we're just coming towards the end of the call, but we'll see how it goes. So we hear and chant about Krishna, yet often we do not remember him in good times. We remember him when we are struggling. Why does that happen?
Yeah, that happens. That's a problem for all of us. And the reason being that we can become complacent and lethargic and just slide into material consciousness. You know, things are going my way. It's sunny outside. I feel good. And it's very common. They say that in the foxholes in World War I, there were no atheists, right? Because they could have died at any moment. And similarly, in the United States, they sent up a spaceship with, I think, 3 astronauts, and they had some technical troubles. The astronauts were endangered. And this, I think, was in the, well, I don't remember the decade anyway. It was the last decade, the last century. They asked everyone to pray for them because they were in danger. Now, when they were fine, when the astronauts were fine and everything appeared okay, no one said pray. It was just in times that they looked like they could lose their lives, and they're saying, pray to God, you know, we reached the limits of our technological ability. And in that case, they were saved. So, yeah, it's very, very natural. And that's really why Queen Kunti says, let these calamities come again and again. Because when these calamities come, we remember you. When everything's fine, you know, we have the kingdom, we have all the comforts of the palace, then we forget you. That's what she says, such an exalted devotee. So what to speak of us? So it takes us an extra effort to remember Krishna when things are going well. That's why the earlier question, you know, I'm suffering, how can we have faith? Well, that's an opportunity to have faith because of that suffering. We can use these calamities, these sufferings to turn to Krishna more earnestly, more eagerly.